me and hopefully eventually to my kids and so forth.
Raphael explains that first, channels were carved around the body of a moai.
He thinks that 20 people carved this moai over a period of time of 5 to 6 years to this stage. This is our sections of people who were, given, as your assignment. This is your section. You can carve, and you can see different, ways of doing it, and you can clearly see the talking marks and how the people were carving and going in and make these deep cuts in the rock like this, that.
The channels reached around and eventually formed a boat-like keel until the statue could be snapped off and fully extracted.
This quarry was established around 900 or 1000 AD. And for a period of at least 500 years, maybe a little bit more, most of the statues that we know about were made. Well, this is a large statue of over 100 tons. This massive statue was in the process of being moved downhill. It's already detached from the mother rock, and it's extracted from the quarry, and it will end at the foot of the hill into a prepare hole to put it in a vertical position. This monstrous monolith needed certainly hundreds of people to move them downhill, to transport them to distant sites all along the coast of the island.
At the base of the quarry slope, the moai were erected in prepared holes so the carving could be finished.
Immediately coming out of the quarry, they came down to a prepared hole, and you can see here the remains of the keel. The main purpose to put the statues in this hole was to finish this section, and they built a very sophisticated wooden frame that was attached to the statue while standing. Then probably using soil, dirt, this debris from the carving process, they built the mounts and the ramps to move it down slope. So actually, the statue will go face down, head first, on top of the rig, and we start moving on these several roads along the coast of the island.
The replica moai is brought in by truck and crane to the transport site. A traditional Polynesian ceremony called an umu tahu is held. The priest's blessing acknowledges that working around a multi-ton statue can be dangerous.
So it's a benediction on behalf of the Catholic Church and this community, for this project and the work that they're doing here to take care of everyone.
Joanne's A-frame sled is ready for the moai. Its unique triangular shape is proportioned exactly for the statue. The team will try to pull the entire rig 100 yards on flat terrain using Joanne's log roller system. The log should roll over this track of thin wood rails.
We're going to move it 5 meters and then stop. And then we're going to regroup, talk about it a little bit, and then we're going to move it. Probably we'll move it to the end of the rollers, and that's the first day. So. Oh, yeah.
Joanne confers with Nico Hawa, who is in charge of the Rapa Nui pulling team. He rehearses his commands before they begin.
We're
pulling on terrain that's flat as a pancake here, and that's the easiest situation. That's where I'd start out, too, to test the idea. But if it's got to be valid, it's got to be something that would work on going up hills and down hills and side hills and stuff like that. I think this system would be a little harder to do on that kind of terrain. But let's give them a chance and see what happens here.
Surprisingly, the logs don't roll. They slide over the rails.
Slide and doesn't roll. It rolled a little bit. It rolled a little bit.
It rolled first and then slide maybe, but it slid first.
We're getting all these beams in place. They're all crooked. They're all bunched up. They slid more on one side and they stopped completely on another side. I don't know why. But now they got them all straightened out. I think we're just about ready to go again.
The rollers tend to move like this and they get stuck. So you can imagine that they had a big problem if they were going, you know, like in a very steep slope, over 5%. That would be a real problem.
You see. We tried rolling. They didn't roll. They all slid. 4 are bunched up here. 3 are bunched up there. We're now going to lash them, so we simply make a sled out of it.
Well, you could see what happened when they started moving their sled. Their rollers went crooked and got all jammed up underneath the sled, so they're going to have to re-rig. And actually, it's too bad, but it's not real surprising, because the use of rollers is one of those ideas that looks great on paper, but it's real hard to make it work in the real world. So what they've decided to do is pretty clever. They're going to take those rollers and they're going to tie them to the bottom of the sled, fix them so that they can't roll anymore, but they also can't go crooked. The disadvantage is going to be, because they can't roll, there'll be more friction, but I think it's going to work better. So they'll lay it back on their rails with their moai, and then they'll just slide it down the rails. I think it'll work pretty well.
The hardest part is overcoming the inertia of 9.5 tons. Then the sled slides easily. This novel solution exploits rope lashings and wood crossbeams that are common in traditional Polynesian culture. The people of the Pacific are intimately tied to the ocean. In ancient times, outrigger canoes were the vital link between islands. The outriggers have 2 beams that extend from the side of the canoe to prevent it from capsizing. The larger voyaging canoes were simply 2 hulls bound together by wood crossbeams and rope lashings. Joanne's theory is that the same seagoing technology was used for transporting moai across land.
If you look down the length of this transport rig, you will see the strong triangular shape that we've created. And what we've got here, we've used basically the metaphor of Polynesian transport technology, which is essentially canoe building technology. So this is a wood rig pegged and lashed in the same way that a large canoe might be lashed. The cross beams act almost as balance beams on an outrigger canoe.
Polynesians made wooden ladders to aid in carrying canoes up on shore. The crossbeams of this ladder are lashed onto long rails, just like the rollers lashed to the sled for the moai.
What we've done is we've taken the canoe ladder concept, which is essentially rails and cross beams, with the moai lashed to the cross beams, and we've just used exactly that technology, the canoe ladder, cross beams, rails, and it works like a charm.
Each group of statues was raised on a long rectangular platform, or ahu. According to island belief, the ahu elevate the ancestral spirits partway between earth and sky. Most ahu platforms are along the coast. The moai face inland, their backs to the sea. To have the moai facing inland on its ahu, the team resorts to modern machinery. Now they have to reposition the statue face down and then rotate it 180 degrees. Vince explains why.
Well, everybody agrees, I think, that the moai were quarried up on the side of the cliffs and were lowered down to the bottom of the slope facing out towards the ocean. And likewise, everybody seems to agree that once they got erected on the ahu out at the seacoast, they were facing inland away from the ocean. So that means that there's one movement that you can't avoid making regardless of what transport method you use. Claudio thinks that the sled was fastened to the face of the moai at the bottom of the quarry slope, and then the whole rig was lowered onto the ground for transport across the island. And if he's right about that, of course, it means that the moai was handled face down instead of face up. But whether he's right about it or not, somewhere between the bottom of the quarry slope and the ahu platform, this moai has to be rotated 180 degrees so that once it's erected on the ahu, it's facing inland away from the sea.
Now repositioned face down, the moai is rotated, but not with the tools of the ancients.
You'll notice that the A-frame is now backwards from the way it was yesterday, which they did with a crane, but I mean, doing it with manpower would be somewhat of a project. It's just a shame to see all the tricky parts done with the crane, because pulling it on the level is not easy, but it's the easiest of all the moves you have to make. And that's the one we're getting to see. It'd be interesting to see the others tried by hand, because I think that it'd be a major operation.
Vince wonders how the islanders moved the giant statues up to the ahu platforms that line the coast. He doubts Joanne's pulling method, since there is no space for long lines of people on ropes behind the high ahu platforms.
As we've seen, many of these platforms are right on the shoreline, and this is actually water out here. This is actually ocean crashing against the bottom of this wall. We have no other way to move it except long lines of pullers out here. There's no place for these pullers to work. They're all down here in the water swimming. We need some other way to get this sled up onto the platform. So watching that, it occurred to me that an improvement on this design that solves that problem would be a sled which has lots of crossbars on it so that you have many places to apply leverage. And that would, for example, enable you to get this sled up onto the platform here just using levers, and therefore nobody would be swimming out in the ocean. And incidentally, this sled works real well for the 180-degree rotation, which we've seen has to be done somewhere between the quarry and the ahu platform. If all the guys on one side lever forward and all the guys on the other side lever back, as you can see, it quite readily rotates the sled the 180 degrees.
Vince has been given 1 day, a half-carved stone of Raphael's, and a few leftover materials to put his new idea to practice. His sled is designed for levering a moai forward when there is no room for long lines of people pulling on ropes.
The lever was probably one of the first tools that primitive people learned how to use. It was really the only way they had to multiply the force of an individual person's muscle power.
The crossbeams act as leverage points for the men to push against.
Okay, what we're trying to do now is just demonstrate rotating the moai on this sled. And by putting skids under and having the people on one side go to the rear, the people on the other side go to the front, and the people in front and back go to each side, as you see, we can rotate it. Okay.
Well, I think it's an interesting experiment. The main problem we have here is that certainly the frame was, built without knowing the weight of the block. So certainly we have a problem there. It's tending to bend a lot. And it's not because the method doesn't work, it's simply because it was not carefully, designed for that block of rock.
The bottom line here is it's not really demonstrating very much because the design of the frame is so inadequate that we can't really make a just extrapolation from what we're seeing.
We are moving it with 14 guys, and it's a big rock, and I could hardly claim that because of that it's a successful experiment. But we've learned a whole lot of stuff, and I think we've shown that a small gang of people with levers can move a big rock.